Rafe Callan adjusted his jacket, the synthetic fabric pulling slightly at his shoulders. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, staring at the shimmering mass of light on the screen in front of him. "Something to say, Lieutenant?" came the sharp voice of Commander Tasha Reno. She leaned over the central console, her dark hair pulled back tightly, her gray uniform immaculate. Rafe cleared his throat. "No, ma'am. Just that we're entering uncharted territory." Tasha raised an eyebrow. "That's why we're here, isn't it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he focused on the display, the cascade of light patterns twisting and shifting like a living thing. This was the Meridian Edge, a region on the border of known space. No human ships had ever ventured this far. Some argued it was a waste of resources, that the cost outweighed the potential discoveries. Others thought they were bound to find something extraordinary. Rafe wasn't sure which camp he fell into. The door to the command deck slid open with a quiet hiss, and Dr. Casimir Rain stepped in, a faint aroma of antiseptic clinging to him. "What do we have?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and concern. "A visual anomaly," Tasha said curtly. "Possibly a gravitational distortion." Rain leaned over Rafe's shoulder, squinting at the display. "That's no gravitational distortion," he murmured. "Then what is it?" Rafe asked. "Hard to say." Rain tapped a few keys on the console, pulling up additional sensor readings. "It's stable, at least for now. But there's a strong electromagnetic field emanating from it. Could be artificial." Tasha folded her arms. "Artificial? As in, someone built it?" Rain shrugged. "Possibly. Could be a natural phenomenon we just don't understand yet. Either way, I suggest caution." Rafe glanced at Tasha. "Do we get closer?" "That's the plan," Tasha said, turning to the helmsman. "Mr. Harris, take us in slowly. I want a full sensor sweep. If that thing sneezes, I want to know about it before we catch the cold." The crew chuckled softly at the commander's dry wit, though Rafe noticed the tension beneath their smiles. No one liked flying into the unknown. The ship's engines hummed louder as Harris brought them closer to the anomaly. Rafe's heart beat a little faster. The swirling lights on the screen grew larger, more defined. What looked like chaotic motion at a distance now revealed subtle patterns like a dance choreographed by unseen forces. "What's that?" Rafe asked, pointing to a faint flicker in one corner of the display. Tasha stepped closer. "Harris, focus on that section." The helmsman nodded, adjusting the ship's orientation. The flicker resolved into something solid, an object, small and dark against the radiant backdrop. "Definitely not natural," Rain said. "Looks like a probe or a drone. Maybe even a derelict satellite." "Run a scan," Tasha ordered. Rafe's hands moved quickly over his console, picking up faint power readings. "No transponder signal. Could be old tech. Very old." Tasha frowned. "Harris, hold position." "Rain, can you get anything else from the readings?" The doctor studied the data. "Barely. Whatever it is, it's been here a long time. Power signature's almost gone. No sign of active systems." Rafe leaned back in his chair. "So, it's just space junk?" "Possibly," Rain said. "But I'd still like to take a closer look. If it's alien technology, even a fragment could tell us something about whoever made it." Tasha hesitated. "You want to send a team out there?" "That's a risk." "It's a calculated risk," Rain said. "And it's why we're out here, isn't it? To find what's out there and learn from it." She glanced at Rafe. "Lieutenant, you up for a little field work?" Rafe blinked. "You want me out there, Commander?" Tasha's lips curved into a faint smile. "Unless you'd rather stay on the nice, safe bridge." He didn't hesitate. "I'll suit up." Half an hour later, Rafe stood in the airlock, the pressure suit feeling stiff and awkward around his body. Rain stood beside him, adjusting his own suit's controls. "Ever done a spacewalk?" Rain asked casually. "Once. Simulated during training," Rafe admitted. The doctor chuckled. "You'll be fine. Just don't let go of the tether and don't panic if you spin a little. The suit will stabilize you." "Comforting," Rafe said dryly. Tasha's voice crackled over their helmets. "You two ready?" "Ready as we'll ever be," Rain replied. The airlock hissed open, revealing the star-speckled void. The probe, or whatever it was, hovered in the distance, illuminated by the faint glow of the anomaly. Rafe felt his stomach tighten as they stepped out, their boots locking onto the guide rails. Rain moved with practiced ease, attaching the tether line as they advanced toward the object. "Remember," Tasha's voice came through their comms, "we're watching your vitals. If anything looks off, we'll pull you back." "Understood," Rain said, his tone calm. As they approached, the object grew clearer. It was no ordinary piece of space debris. Smooth, sleek panels of some unknown alloy reflected the light faintly. Strange markings, symbols, or perhaps some kind of script ran along its surface. Rain was the first to reach it. He stopped, floating just a meter away. "Incredible." This design, it's nothing like any known alien tech. The material doesn't match any database records. Think we can bring it aboard? Rafe asked. Not yet, Rain said. We need to document it first. Take readings, measure radiation levels, see if there's any residual energy that could pose a risk. Rafe set to work, his gloved hands moving over the scanner's controls. The data streamed in, lines of numbers and graphs scrolling across his helmet display. Getting a faint energy signature, he said. It's weak, but it's there. Rain nodded. That means it still might have functioning components. We'll have to be careful. As they worked, the silence of space pressed down on them. Broken only by the occasional word exchanged over the comm, Rafe found his initial anxiety giving way to fascination. Whatever this object was, it represented a puzzle waiting to be solved. Back on the ship, Tasha's voice interrupted. We're picking up a fluctuation in the anomaly. Something's shifting. Rain's head snapped up. What kind of fluctuation? Energy levels are spiking, Tasha said. Could be temporary, but I need you two back here now. Rafe exchanged a glance with Rain. What do we do about this thing? We leave it, Rain said. For now, it's not going anywhere. Reluctantly, they began their return to the airlock, the probe receding into the distance. As they reached the ship and stepped inside, Rafe felt a mix of relief and frustration. They'd come so close to uncovering something extraordinary, only to be pulled back before they could finish. But as he removed his helmet and looked at Rain's thoughtful expression, he knew this was only the beginning. Whatever the anomaly was, whatever the probe might hold, they would figure it out together. Chapter 2. The Diplomatic Exchange. So, Rafe said, leaning back in his chair, do you want to tell me why I was dragged into a meeting before I'd even had coffee? Commander Tasha Reno didn't look up from her datapad. She stood at the head of the conference room table, scrolling through pages of reports. You were chosen for this assignment because I thought you could handle it. Was I wrong? Rafe rolled his eyes. No, ma'am. Just curious. Across the table, Dr. Casimir Rain shifted in his seat. He was meticulously straightening the stylus he'd placed next to his own datapad. If you're done complaining, Lieutenant, perhaps we can focus on what we've got here. These are initial translations of the Valenian communication logs. Fascinating, really. Their language structure is... Hold on, Rafe interrupted, sitting forward. Translations? I thought this was about some supply chain snafu or a routine survey. It's much bigger than that, Tasha said. We've intercepted a data stream from the Valenian system. It appears to be some sort of diplomatic correspondence. The higher-ups want us to decode it and understand its contents before our next contact with their delegation. Rafe frowned. And I'm here because... Tasha folded her arms, finally giving him her full attention. You're here because you have a knack for spotting patterns. I need someone who can think on their feet, someone who can connect the dots, even when they're not obvious. And because no one else volunteered, Rain added with a faint smirk. Rafe groaned. Great. This is exactly how I wanted to spend my day. Decoding alien texts. Tasha smirked. Welcome to First Contact, Callan. Let's get started. Hours passed as the three of them pored over the alien documents. The holographic display projected shimmering lines of text into the air. The Valenian language was as intricate as it was beautiful, a web of symbols that shifted depending on context. Rafe squinted at a particularly dense paragraph, his eyes scanning for anything that resembled a pattern. Okay, look at this, he said, tapping a section of text. These three symbols keep appearing at the start of every transmission. It's like a signature. Could be the sender's identifier. Rain leaned over. Possibly. But it could also denote a status or a role. In many languages, prefixes or recurring phrases indicate hierarchy. Tasha glanced at the projection. What happens if we isolate those symbols and cross-reference them with the known cultural terms from the Valenian primer? Rafe nodded and began filtering the text, narrowing the results to messages containing those symbols. Here we go. There are 6 messages with that identifier. They all seem to involve instructions or directives. Like orders, Rain said. Could be, Rafe agreed. Maybe these aren't just diplomatic logs. Maybe we're looking at operational commands. Which could explain the urgency, Tasha added. If these are orders, the Valenian leadership might be mobilizing something. We need to understand what before the next negotiation. Speaking of which, Rafe said, who's actually meeting with their delegation? Us. Tasha nodded. That's right. We're expected to present our findings and discuss the terms of further cooperation. No pressure. Rafe sighed. No pressure at all. Just humanity's first interstellar partnership resting on our shoulders. You'll manage, Tasha said firmly. Now let's keep digging. By late afternoon, the team was still locked in the conference room. Rafe leaned back, stretching his arms over his head. This feels like it's going in circles. For every pattern we find, 3 more pop up that make no sense. That's how this kind of work goes, Rain said, his tone patient. Linguistic decryption is about gradual progress. Every piece of the puzzle you place brings the picture into focus. Rafe snorted. Easy for you to say. I'm not a linguist. I'm a pilot. You're a pilot with an excellent eye for detail, Rain corrected. And that's exactly why you're here. Tasha glanced at the clock. We need a fresh angle. Rafe, pull up the communications timestamps. Let's see if there's a pattern in when these messages were sent. He nodded and opened the data log. Looks like they come in clusters, 3 or 4 messages at a time, usually about an hour apart. Rain rubbed his chin. Could suggest a coordinated effort. Whoever's sending these might be updating multiple recipients simultaneously. Tasha stepped closer to the display, studying the patterns. If we can identify the purpose of these updates, we might gain leverage in the negotiations. Rain, what do the symbols at the end of each message signify? I'm not entirely sure yet, Rain admitted. They're consistent across multiple entries, but the context is unclear. They could be acknowledgements, sign-offs, or even status reports. Well, Rafe said, if they're status reports, maybe we're looking at progress updates on a project or operation. That's a plausible hypothesis, Rain said. Let's see if there are any references to known locations or resource terms in those sections. They worked together, cross-referencing the symbols with the limited Valenian vocabulary database. After several attempts, Rafe noticed something. Wait a second. This phrase here, didn't we see something similar in the cultural primer under agricultural terms? Rain leaned in, his eyes lighting up. Yes. That's the term for a resource depot. It's a location marker. So these messages are tracking resource distribution, Rafe concluded. That's why they're sent at regular intervals. Tasha smiled faintly. Good work, both of you. If we can confirm this, we'll have something concrete to present to their delegation. Rafe glanced at the clock. Looks like we're pulling an all-nighter. Rain smiled. Welcome to first contact diplomacy. By the time they left the conference room, the stars were shining through the observation windows, their faint glow casting long shadows across the deck. Rafe stretched again, rolling his shoulders. So, Commander, he said, how are we supposed to present this? Just lay out the facts and hope for the best. Tasha gave him a sidelong glance. That's the general idea. Stick to what we know, acknowledge what we don't, and be clear about our intentions. The Valenians respect honesty and clarity. Rafe raised an eyebrow. You're sure about that? As sure as we can be, given the circumstances, she replied. Remember, they reached out to us. That says something about their willingness to engage. Rain nodded. The more we learn about their communication style, the better we'll be able to adapt. If we can show them we've made progress in understanding their language and culture, it'll go a long way. Sure, but I still don't get why they're so interested in us, Rafe said. We're just one species among who knows how many out here. What makes us so special? Tasha's gaze turned thoughtful. Maybe it's not about being special. Maybe it's about being different. They've had their own history, their own challenges. They might see in us a perspective they haven't encountered before. Rafe shrugged. I guess. Just seems like a lot of effort on their part. Rain chuckled. And yet here we are, putting in just as much effort to understand them. It works both ways. Rafe sighed. Fair point. Let's just hope all this effort pays off when we finally sit across from them. Tasha gave him a rare smile. I think we'll do fine, Lieutenant. Now get some rest. We'll need all the sharp minds we can muster tomorrow. Rafe nodded, stifling a yawn. As he walked away from the conference room, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement beneath his lingering skepticism. This wasn't what he'd signed up for, but maybe, just maybe, it was exactly where he needed to be. Chapter 3, The First Contact Crisis. Are you sure you want to take point on this? Rafe Callan asked, strapping himself into his seat on the shuttle. We've barely got any intel on these guys, let alone what their idea of peace talks looks like. Commander Tasha Reno didn't look up from the datapad resting on her knee. Relax, Lieutenant. This isn't a combat mission. It's diplomacy. Keep your eyes open and your mouth shut unless I ask for your input. Rafe raised his hands in mock surrender. Yes, ma'am. Silent and observant. Got it. Across from them, Dr. Casimir Rain was adjusting the small case of diagnostic equipment he always seemed to carry. The key here is going to be listening, he said, looking up at Rafe. The Valenians have their own protocols and their own ways of conveying meaning. If we rush to judgment or jump in with assumptions, we risk undermining the entire exchange. And that's why you're here, Doc? Rafe asked, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. To make sure we don't say anything dumb? Rain's expression remained calm. Something like that. Though I'd prefer to think of myself as a guide, not a babysitter. Rafe grinned, but his grip tightened on the armrest. He couldn't shake the unease settling in his stomach. Heading into unknown territory always had a way of making him jumpy, even if they weren't expecting a fight. The shuttle docked at the Valenian outpost without incident. The structure itself was an odd blend of organic curves and metallic precision, as if it had grown rather than been built. Rafe followed Tasha and Rain through the airlock, his eyes darting around at the alien architecture. Everything seemed to glow faintly, casting soft blue and silver hues that shifted as they moved. A group of Valenian representatives awaited them in the central atrium. Sarav, the delegation leader, stood at the forefront. Her stature was imposing, not in size, but in presence. There was something about the way she carried herself, the deliberate way she moved and gestured, that made Rafe feel as if she was always one step ahead. Her skin, which shimmered faintly under the ambient light, and her sharp, probing eyes only added to the sense of mystery. "Welcome," Sarav said, her voice smooth and measured. "We appreciate your willingness to come here." Tasha extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "We're honored by the invitation, Envoy Sarav. We hope this meeting will bring our peoples closer to understanding one another." Sarav tilted her head slightly. "Understanding begins with patience and clarity. Please come this way." As the group moved deeper into the outpost, Sarav led them to a circular chamber with a transparent dome that offered a breathtaking view of the planet below. A soft hum filled the air, the source of which Rafe couldn't identify. Sarav gestured for them to sit at the low, smooth table in the center. Once they were settled, she folded her hands and said, "Before we discuss formal agreements, we must address a matter of concern. A faction among my people has voiced opposition to these talks." Tasha's expression didn't change, but Rafe could see her eyes narrow slightly. "Opposition? To peaceful relations?" "Indeed," Sarav said. "Some view your arrival in our system as a precursor to unwelcome changes. They fear that opening our society to your influence may lead to unforeseen consequences." Rain leaned forward. "Are these fears based on past experiences with other species?" Sarav's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she spoke. "No. You are the first to approach us in this way. It is precisely because we have no precedent that some are hesitant. They worry about losing control over their own destiny." Tasha spoke carefully. "And what is your position, Envoy Sarav? Do you share these concerns?" Sarav's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "My position is that knowledge dispels fear. If we can reach a mutual understanding, we can demonstrate that our cultures can coexist without either losing its identity." Rafe shifted in his seat. "So what do we need to do to get that message across?" "You need to listen," Sarav said simply. "Listen to what we value, what we cherish, and show that you respect it. Words alone are not enough. Actions must follow." Tasha nodded. "We're prepared to learn from you, just as we hope you'll learn from us." Sarav studied her for a moment. A promising start. The discussion continued, diving into the specifics of each side's priorities. Rain asked questions about Valenian technology, culture, and governance, while Tasha outlined humanity's goals and what they hoped. Them gauging their reactions. A sudden chime interrupted the conversation. Sarav tapped a control panel embedded in the table, and a Valenian subordinate appeared on the screen. The aliens spoke quickly in their own language, the tone urgent. Sarav's expression darkened. "What's going on?" Tasha asked. Sarav's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. "One of the opposition factions has taken control of a relay station in orbit. They've jammed certain communications and are threatening to disrupt our planetary infrastructure if we proceed with these talks." Tasha straightened. "How long has this been going on?" "Only a few minutes. I was informed as soon as the disruption began. We have measures in place, but the timing is troubling." Rafe leaned in. "Sounds like they're trying to intimidate us, to make us second-guess this partnership." "That appears to be their goal," Sarav said. "They may be hoping to pressure me into halting negotiations. But that will not happen." Tasha stood. "We'll help. If you give us access to the station systems, we can work with your tech teams to counter their interference." Sariv regarded her silently for a moment before nodding. Your assistance would be appreciated. I'll inform my people. The next several hours were a blur of activity. Tasha coordinated with the Valenian technicians while Rafe and Rain worked on deciphering the alien systems. It wasn't easy, everything about the Valenian interface was unfamiliar, from the input methods to the logic underlying their security protocols. But bit by bit, they began to make progress. Looks like they've locked out the main control grid, Rafe muttered, his fingers dancing over the holographic interface. We'll have to bypass it. Can you do that without tripping their failsafes? Tasha asked, leaning over his shoulder. I can try, Rafe said, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. But if I mess this up, you won't, Rain said calmly. Just focus. Rafe took a deep breath and continued. As he worked, Sariv joined them, her expression unreadable. Your team is quite resourceful, she said. Tasha nodded. Rafe here has a knack for thinking outside the box. He's one of the best. Rafe glanced up at her. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Commander. No pressure. Sariv tilted her head. Your approach is unconventional, but effective. Rafe smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. After another tense hour, they managed to regain partial control of the relay station. The opposition's jamming signals weakened, and the Valenian technicians were able to re-establish critical links. We're back online, Rain said, letting out a long breath. Sariv placed a hand on the console. You've done more than assist. You've proven that cooperation between our species is not just possible, but practical. I will ensure this is known to my people. Rafe leaned back in his chair, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. Glad we could help, Tasha nodded. This was just the first step. If we keep working together, I think we'll do more than just survive out here, we'll thrive. Chapter 5. The Inward Journey. Have you ever been out here, Commander? Rafe asked, scanning the starfield as he adjusted the ship's trajectory. This far from any support? From anyone who could bail us out if something goes wrong? Commander Tasha Reno glanced up from her datapad. Farther, she said simply, her eyes narrowing as she checked their position on the holographic map. But never quite like this. We're charting territory humanity has barely dreamed of. Rafe shook his head. And they picked us to be the first, huh? Some lucky draw. You can thank your spotless service record, she replied. And maybe my relentless insistence that you'd be useful out here. Glad to know someone has faith in me, Rafe muttered. Don't sell yourself short, Callan, Tasha said, her tone softening slightly. You've proven you can handle the unexpected, and out here, that's worth more than experience in safe, known space. Rafe's attention shifted to the faint blip on his screen. Still no idea what's generating that signal. Just a weak pulse, same interval as before. It's a mystery we need to solve, Dr. Casimir Rain said, leaning over Rafe's shoulder to examine the data. If it's truly artificial, we may be looking at something that predates even the Valenian presence here. Or something they're not telling us about, Rafe countered. He adjusted the long-range scanners again, narrowing the field. If it's this far out, and if they've never mentioned it, Tasha interjected. We can speculate all day, but until we get closer, it's just guesswork. Let's focus on what we can confirm. What do we know so far? Rain straightened, folding his arms. The signal is definitely not natural. It follows a regular pattern, suggesting some form of intentional transmission. But it's degraded, possibly due to age or interference. We haven't found any Valenian data markers, so if it's theirs, it's old and forgotten. Rafe tapped the console, frustrated. Great, so we're chasing a ghost. Not a ghost, Tasha said firmly. Something real. Something worth finding. Rafe sighed. Well, let's hope whatever it is wants to be found. I'd hate to think we came all this way just to hit another dead end. Keep at it, Tasha said. We're on the right track. Every anomaly we've investigated so far has taught us something new. This one will be no different. As the hours dragged on, the tension in the cockpit lightened. Rain and Rafe had settled into a rhythm, their back-and-forth banter helping to keep the monotony at bay. "So, what do you think it'll be?" Rafe asked. "Some ancient alien relay? A long-lost Valenian probe?" Rain smirked. "Given our luck, it'll be a weather station that got knocked out of orbit." "Wouldn't that just be perfect?" Rafe said dryly. All this effort to find the intergalactic equivalent of a busted thermometer. Tasha, sitting nearby, allowed herself a rare smile. "If that's what it turns out to be, I'll let you write the report." "Oh, joy," Rafe quipped. "Nothing I love more than filing reports." "Someone's got to keep the bureaucracy running," Rain said, his tone teasing. "Besides, the paperwork's how we get paid." "I thought we were doing this for the thrill of discovery," Rafe replied, mock indignant. "Discovery doesn't buy fuel," Rain retorted. "Or new boots." Rafe laughed. "Fair point." Tasha raised an eyebrow. "Glad to see you two are enjoying yourselves." "Hey, someone's got to keep the morale up," Rafe said with a grin. "And since you're the serious one, we figure it's our job to balance you out." Rain chuckled. "It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it." Tasha shook her head but said nothing, allowing the easy camaraderie to fill the small cockpit. Several hours later, the signal strengthened. The faint pulse that had been barely perceptible now pinged clearly on their instruments. Rafe leaned forward, his hands flying over the controls. "That's it. We're closing in." Rain peered at the screen, his voice suddenly serious. "It's not a probe. The energy signature is too strong. This is something bigger." Tasha stood, her gaze fixed on the display. "Give me visuals." Rafe activated the forward cameras. At first, all they saw was empty space, scattered with distant stars. But as the ship edged closer, a shape began to emerge. It was massive, far larger than anything they'd expected. A dark, angular structure floated silently in the void, its surface marked with patterns that didn't match any known design. "Looks like a station," Rafe said, his voice quieter now. "But not one of ours. Not Valenian either, as far as I can tell." Rain nodded slowly. "No recognizable symbols. And the materials, they don't correspond to any databank entries we've got." Tasha crossed her arms, her mind racing. "It's old. Very old. The design, the placement, this was here long before we arrived in this system." "So what do we do?" Rafe asked. "Board it." Rain shook his head. "We need to proceed carefully. That structure might be unstable and we have no idea what condition it's in." Tasha thought for a moment. "We'll start with a remote scan. See if we can get a layout of the interior, identify any active systems. No one sets foot inside until we know it's safe." "And if we find something active?" Rain asked. "Something we can't explain?" Tasha's expression hardened. "Then we figure out how to explain it. But first, we gather data." Rafe couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement. This wasn't just another Valenian artifact. This was something entirely new, something that could rewrite everything they thought they knew about this region of space. As he adjusted the ship's position, he glanced at Rain and then at Tasha. "I guess we're not turning back, are we?" Tasha's response was swift. "Not a chance." For the first time in hours, Rafe grinned. "Then let's see what's out there." Chapter 6, A New Order. Rafe Callan sat in the cramped cockpit of the Valenian shuttle, the smooth, almost liquid-like controls beneath his fingertips. Beside him, Dr. Casimir Rain scanned the shimmering readouts with his usual calm efficiency, while Commander Tasha Reno stood just behind them, her arms crossed, gazing at the alien station that loomed ahead. The structure floated silently in the void, its angles sharp, its surface dotted with faintly glowing nodes that pulsed like a living heartbeat. "You sure this thing is safe to dock with?" Rafe asked, guiding the shuttle closer. "As safe as we can confirm," Rain replied. "The initial scans didn't show any active defenses and its atmosphere remains stable. It's as close to a green light as we're going to get." "That's comforting," Rafe muttered, adjusting the throttle. "What are the odds this place just decides to wake up and swat us away like a fly?" "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Tasha said. "Callan, keep her steady." "Rain, double-check the interior readouts. I don't want any surprises once we step inside." Rain nodded, his fingers gliding over the alien controls. "Air pressure is holding steady. Gravity's roughly 0.8 of Earth standard. No unusual energy spikes since we approached." "Sounds inviting," Rafe said, glancing at the massive docking hatch. The glow from the station's surface reflected off his visor. "What's the protocol if something starts moving in there?" Tasha's voice was firm. "We regroup and fall back. The goal is to gather information, not to take unnecessary risks." Rafe sighed. "Falling back sounds good to me. I'll make sure the engines are primed for a quick exit." The shuttle connected with a faint shudder, the clamps locking into place. Tasha leaned closer to the comms panel. "Harris, you're in charge while we're gone. Keep an open channel and be ready to pull us out if the station destabilizes. Aye, Commander, the helmsman's voice came back over the comms. We'll keep a close watch. The station's interior was a strange mix of familiar and alien. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing faintly with light. The floor was firm, smooth, but not metallic, more like a dense, flexible polymer. Rafe couldn't decide if it was welcoming or unnerving. Okay, he said, scanning the corridor with a portable device. Air's breathable, temperature's stable, and no signs of active security systems. It's almost too good to be true. Don't jinx it, Tasha warned. Stay alert. Rain, anything on those readings? Rain adjusted his scanner. We're definitely seeing a power source deeper in. The energy signature's faint, but it's there. If we can reach it, we might be able to learn who built this place. Rafe took point as they moved through the corridor. If we're lucky, maybe they left behind a user manual. Something that says press here for history lessons. Rain chuckled. In my experience, advanced civilizations rarely label things so conveniently. Doesn't hurt to dream, Rafe said, stepping into a wide chamber. The room's center was dominated by a massive pillar, its surface etched with intricate patterns that shifted as they watched. Around the pillar, smaller pedestals held what looked like spherical devices, each glowing faintly. Anyone else feel like we just walked into an alien museum? Rafe asked. It's more like a control center, Rain said, examining one of the pedestals. These orbs might be data storage units. If we can interface with them. Carefully, Tasha cut in. Let's not activate anything until we know what we're dealing with. Understood, Rain said. I'll run a diagnostic sweep first. No direct interaction until we confirm they're stable. Rafe turned his attention to the pillar. The patterns weren't random, they repeated in complex cycles. What do you think this thing does? He asked, running a hand along the smooth surface. Looks like some kind of hub. Rain glanced over. Possibly a main conduit for the station's systems. If the energy readings are accurate, it's probably channeling power to keep the atmosphere and gravity stable. Which means, Tasha added, if we tamper with it, we could destabilize the entire station. Stay clear of that for now. Rafe nodded and stepped back. Got it. Hands off the big shiny pillar. As Rain continued his scans, Rafe moved to the opposite side of the chamber, his eyes drawn to a smaller console embedded in the wall. It had a more familiar layout with what looked like a data port that resembled human and Valenian designs. This might be something we can work with, he said. Looks like a standard interface. Tasha approached, her brow furrowed. Can you patch in? Give me a minute, Rafe said, connecting a portable translator. If this thing can recognize even part of our code-base, I might be able to pull some basic info. The device word and a string of alien symbols appeared on the screen. After a moment, the translator began converting them into readable text. Looks like a systems log, Rafe said, scrolling through the data. Maintenance records, environmental controls, and something else. A lot of entries marked as classified. Classified by whom? Tasha asked. Rafe shook his head. No way to know yet. Could be whoever built this place didn't want just anyone poking around. Keep digging, she said. Rain, how's that diagnostic coming? Still running, Rain said, his eyes fixed on the scanner. No anomalies so far. Whatever these orbs are, they're inactive but intact. Tasha's comm unit chirped and Harris's voice came through. Commander, we're picking up some unusual activity on the station's exterior. Minor energy fluctuations, nothing serious, but it's new. Tasha's jaw tightened. Understood. Keep monitoring. If it escalates, let me know immediately. Rafe looked over. Should we be worried about that? Not yet, Tasha said. But we need to wrap this up quickly. Find anything useful? Rafe shook his head. Still sorting through logs. Most of it's maintenance records, like I said. But there are a few entries that mention external probes. Could mean there's more out there, other stations, satellites, who knows? Could be how we're getting that signal, Rain said. If it's linked to a network of stations, it might have been relaying data before it went dormant. Tasha nodded. All the more reason to figure out who built this and why. Rafe leaned back from the console. I'll keep looking, but we're running out of time. Those energy fluctuations could mean the station's waking up. Or failing, Rain added grimly. Either way, we need to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Then let's finish up and get out of here, Tasha said. We'll analyze what we've found back on the ship. No sense in pushing our luck. Rafe took one last look at the console. Fine by me. This place is starting to give me the creeps. With that, they began retracing their steps, leaving the chamber and making their way back to the shuttle. Rafe's mind churned with questions. What had they just uncovered? And more importantly, what was still waiting to be found?